Hey everyone, welcome back to New Slang. I hope everyone had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. I am music journalist Thomas Mooney, and this week has been one of those weeks that I've had circled on the calendar for quite a while, and I'm so glad it all kind of got lined up and we were able to do it. This Friday, that's July 9th, the Flatlanders are releasing Treasure of Love. It's their first studio record since 2009's Hills and Valleys, which I've kind of dubbed this Flatlanders week for New Slang since these past couple of weeks I've been able to sit down and talk with Jimmie Dale Gilmore, Joe Ely, and Butch Hancock of the Flatlanders. And as you'd expect by the title of this episode, we are kicking it off with this conversation with Jimmie Dale Gilmore. So I mention it plenty during this podcast, so y'all will probably already know this, but just in case you don't, maybe this is your first time listening to New Slang. I'm based in Lubbock, and New Slang's origins are as a Lubbock, Panhandle, West Texas based music blog. And much of those roots of what New Slang is was always about the music that came from this place and conversations with artists who claimed Lubbock as their home at one time or another. So in some sense, we're coming really full circle with these interviews with Jimmie, Joe, and Butch. I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully give the Flatlanders their proper due. Hopefully we're able to contextualize and get a better understanding of what the Flatlanders did for Lubbock. I think to understand the Flatlanders is to understand them as individual artists. And so when I talk about them in this sense of like what they did, I'm really kind of talking about what they did solo, because there was those huge gaps between what the Flatlanders were as a group and as a band. So when I say they, I'm really just kind of talking about their individual solo careers, more so than the band itself, because obviously as that first title that just kind of came back into circulation back in, I guess it was 1990, more a legend than a band, and that was very much the case. But at any rate, the Flatlanders, they came up at this like really pivotal time within Lubbock and Texas music in general. They're really coming up in this transition period of sorts, where you're kind of seeing the phase out of the big dance hall bands and the rise of the folk songwriter, the country songwriter. And there's plenty of artists who are right there in that same boat as Jimmie, Joe, and Butch. But for Lubbock, they kind of set that standard or the template going forward. And if you look at like any music scene, it's almost always when the artists start putting a value on writing their own material and telling the stories of their people. When a music scene starts to cultivate the importance of the songwriter, the storyteller, that's when I think things really change for it. And you really see those ripples even today. You see those lasting effects on Lubbock. It's in part why folks really think of Lubbock as a songwriter town. There's really a reputation for that. It's why songwriters here, they feel that pressure of being a songwriter. Now granted, that's probably a universal feeling by now, but I still think it's slightly different here in Lubbock. So up here in the Panhandle, and Lubbock specifically, you have these big giant figures of Buddy Holly, and of course like just the touch of Bob Wills, originally from Turkey, Texas. And then the one that maybe goes a little bit underrated is Woody Guthrie, because he did live in Pampa for a time. While he wasn't a household name by any stretch during his time in Pampa, it was this very, very brief period. You do get that Dust Bowl sense to what his music was doing. I say all that because like those kind of figures, they're giant, they're iconic, they're big. And while yes, they are talking about rural life, they're talking about West Texas, they're talking about the Panhandle, they're almost too big. When it comes to Jimmie, Joe, Butch, Terry Allen, that bunch, those songs and like what they were doing, it almost grounded it in a very commonplace, a very plain spoken kind of way where it seemed achievable, it seemed obtainable. And that's just like a small little facet of what I think is so important about what they did for Panhandle and Lubbock music. Now, I feel like I could go on forever about this, but one, you probably kind of get the point by now, and two, you really came to hear Jimmie talk more so than me. Today's presenting partner is our pals over at Desert Door Texas Soto. If you've been listening to New Slang for really any amount of time, you'll know that Desert Door is one of my all-time favorite premium, high-quality spirits. If you haven't or aren't sure what exactly a Soto is, I'm going to let you in on a little secret that's going to up the game on your liquor cabinet. For starters, the best reference point that I can point you to is to think about a tequila or a mezcal. Do you feel that Western desert, that Texas ruggedness? Okay, Sotol is like that, but a little bit more refined, smooth, and fragrant. It intrigues the palate and offers these hints of vanilla and citrus. There's an earthiness that often sends me right back to my Trans-Pecos and far west Texas roots. There's plenty to love about Desert Door. For me, it all starts right there. A close second is just how versatile Desert Door really is. You can go full highbrow and experiment with concocting a variety of cocktails that call for muddling fresh fruit, sprigs of thyme, sticks of cinnamon. It's perfect for that world. If you're a little bit more down home, if you've just rolled up the sleeves of your denim Wrangler button-up, it's perfect for that as well. If you're just desiring something that's short and sweet, it hits the mark every time. Desert Door is genuine and authentically West Texan. It's inherently West Texan. They harvest Sotol plants out in the wild and are knowledgeable conservationists at heart. That's obviously something incredibly important to me. They shine a light on what makes West Texas special and unique and worth preserving and keeping it safe from exploitation. Right now, you can find Desert Door all over Texas, Colorado, Tennessee, and there's budding numbers in places like New Mexico, Arizona, California, and Georgia. Best thing you can do is to check out desertdoor.com to find where Desert Door is locally. Again, that's desertdoor.com. If this is your first time listening to New Slang, I would appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. New Slang is available virtually everywhere you can listen to podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, be sure to leave one of those 5-star reviews. That does go a long way. Head on over to the merch store while you're at it. That would be newslangpodcast.bigcartel.com. Over there we have t-shirts and shot glasses and coffee mugs and a bunch of other stuff. Go check it out. Go buy something. And yeah, we'll make this one really, really short. All the links that I just mentioned, they will be in the show notes as well. I do want to make a quick note. We did this interview on Zoom, and for some reason at the very beginning here, it kind of jumbled up the audio. I went ahead and cut it off because it's just really me easing into the interview and mentioning Treasure of Love, and then we just kind of start talking about radio. So I'm just going to cut myself off right there and just go into where Jimmy picks up on radio. Which, yes, let's get on into the interview. Here is Jimmie Dale Gilmore.
And we had, of course, in Lubbock, we had country station, top 40 type stuff. And then we also had even, television coming along. Dick Clark, music, a version of that. Little Richard and Fats Domino and Lloyd Price. It was just radio music. I didn't think that's New Orleans music. It was just these songs that I liked a lot. So, and that was just really a golden age of that before FM came along and before it got also locked down to playlists. That you could have some of everything. We could hear the real like hardcore blues and hillbilly country stuff on the border stations late at night, and we could hear the real commercial Nashville stuff and L.A. and New York and all the music being produced everywhere. We had it all to choose from, and it seemed like after that, people started. That was one thing that Joe and Butch and I all had in common was we liked so many different kinds of music, and we never did go, oh, I'm a rock and roll guy and I can't stand that country stuff, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And we knew lots of people that were like that. They decide, this is the camp I'm in, so I'm not going to like that other kind of music. And I think that's just stupid.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things where even if you are like a rock and roll guy, you guys being from Lubbock, Texas, you're going to be informed by country because it's inescapable in some respects. And, I think you always hear stories about y'all's generation growing up in Lubbock and going out and having these parties where you guys would like park all around and have like the headlights all pointing in and tuning into the same radio station. Was that kind of the way it was growing up, or is that kind of more romanticized?
That sort of thing happened a few times, but it was definitely true that we hung out together and listened to the radio in the car, and I don't remember doing it exactly in that way more than a handful of times, but it did happen. It wasn't like a nightly occurrence.
Right. Yeah. It's this interesting, I've lived in Lubbock the last 10, 15 years now. And I think it's very easy to romanticize this point in Lubbock as far as where you guys are coming from, Terry Allen's, the Maines brothers of the world, where we kind of miss the, it's hard to comprehend maybe the time span, where it's easy to just think all this stuff happened in 18 months or something, but there's these lulls, these years, these gaps that go in between these monumental albums or these moments where you guys are playing along or whatever the case. What's it like, I guess, reflecting back and understanding that, like, or like trying to maybe have other people understand that Lubbock was a spot where these great musicians were coming from, but it was also like that in a lot of other places as well. And maybe that the time gap, there's maybe some more quote unquote boring times between these really nice, great, high points.
Well, one thing that was a little unusual about Lubbock, and I think, in till fairly recently actually, was that it was dry. There was no, and so any bars or anything that had alcohol and all were illegal. And so Joe and I both played in a lot of those places. Early on, I didn't play in bands, but Joe did, but we both played also solo in some little listening places, and some of them were these bootleg joints that were. So there was an underground culture kind of in Lubbock and there was lots and lots and lots of good music, but not anything you would hear of anywhere on the radio. It was a rare thing. There were so many great musicians in Lubbock, but it was rare for any of them. Hardly anybody did what Buddy did, or although there was a lot of people like Mac Davis and Waylon Jennings. There was a lot of Lubbock people that became international stars, but there was tons of equally great music that never got heard anywhere. I pretty much suspect that that's still the case there now. I haven't spent any time in Lubbock in a long time, so I don't really know the young musicians hanging out there. Everything's changed. Everything's all different. Lubbock's bigger. There are bars. There are, but we. And I sort of think that in lots of ways that's the case everywhere. There are lots of good musicians all over the place that get overlooked, and some of them end up never being noticed. And they're flukes of timing, of luck. One time I got to be friends with Colonel Tom Parker before he died, and he told me one time, you know who I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. Elvis's,
yes, sir,
Colonel. And he told me that one time that he said there are three things that you have to become genuinely successful in show business, in music or probably in any business, but in show business in particular. He said you got to have, first of all, you got to actually have some talent for it to keep going at all, and you have to have hard work. It doesn't happen without that happening, and luck. And he said, if any one of those three is missing, then it won't happen. I'm by the age I am now, I know so many people that had the talent and the hard work, but they didn't have the luck. I've always kind of felt like that. It was a strange fluke that several people did break through in Lubbock. Some hugely internationally, and then some kind of like us, that had good, solid music careers without being giant stars, and then all kinds of other great musicians that just went on into other jobs and stuff because it just didn't pan out right.
Yeah,
I don't know that I answered your question exactly, but that's the train of thought you started.
No, I think there's very much something to that whole. When you see people talk about, especially like to give the example of like when people win awards for anything, they never ever kind of thank just the serendipity of luck, because like I think that a lot of times like it is luck where you got to be in the right place in the right time sometimes, and I think that you can do that with not just the music industry, but a lot of things in life is contribute to just the timing of luck every once in a while. But you mentioned how like there's artists that come out of a place and they become globally known. They become known past their region, and then there's of course always this underbelly of talent that just never kind of gets recognized other than just being from where they're from. I think that still happens here in Lubbock, and I think that it probably happens in most places. But what's interesting about Lubbock, and maybe this is just because, again, going back to kind of being here for the last 15 years or so, and that's I wonder how much of Lubbock now is like getting notoriety because of Lubbock of the past. As far as like if we just buy into this whole, well, there's something in the water kind of thing, right? Yeah. Where like people just kind of, if you mention you're from Lubbock, you're a Lubbock musician, you feel like maybe there's a little bit of that cut from the same fabric of these guys like y'all from the past. I wonder if there's a little bit of that happening in today's world.
Oh, I'm sure. It's bound to be. That's part of, there is the old nothing exceeds like success. It's been true forever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's I 100% agree on that one. Something that's maybe I find really interesting is when an artist realizes like the first time that like they can do songs, they can write songs, and it doesn't necessarily have to be where you're just playing someone else's songs. Do you remember like the first time like you kind of realized or recognized that some of your peers were writing original music, and that that's something that you could dive into as well?
Yes, I know exactly. I know when it happened. I was at Monterey High School, and Terry Allen was who I knew just a little bit around, and he was older than me. He's 2 or 3 years older than me, and so we weren't real close friends or anything. Later on, we became very close friends, but it was a high school, like a carnival at Monterey. Like it's like either I can't remember, Halloween or something. I don't remember for sure, but I remember going in this one room, and there's a guy over in the corner playing the piano, playing his own songs, and it was Terry. And it was just wonderful. It just knocked me out. And it was, I was already playing guitar and, learning to play and doing a little bit of singing, but I wasn't a public performer at all. I was, in high school but that, I think I had always believed that I kind of planned on being a songwriter someday. I think that was always, it was sort of built into me because my dad and I had this shared love of that early music that I was talking about. My dad was a guitar player, and so, but that was the first time I heard a person I knew, a real live person, play a song they had written. And he played several songs. I could remember little snippets of just a couple of them, but he played, that was what opened my mind. I've said a lot of times looking back on it, I kind of think that my belief was, I want to be a songwriter, but to be a songwriter, you have to be old and grown up and have had a lot of experiences and stuff like that. And then there was Terry, right, playing these really great songs and just being so interesting, So it's strangely, my history has a very deep connection with Terry Allen from way before. And then later on, after he moved out to California and went to art school and all that stuff, was when I actually got to know him. I was out there with some friends, and Terry and I got to be real close friends. Even then, though, I still, it's still that I was younger than him and everything, and I regarded him as like an elder statesman or something, even though he was probably 23. But that was a very specific thing. And then later on, of course, Butch and I had already been friends long before that. But Butch and I both became musicians without the other one knowing it. It was very strange. When we both found out that we both played and liked a lot of the same music, we already were, adept enough to start sitting around and playing together. And but Butch, real early on, started coming up with such quality songs. That was sort of the bar was raised for what could be done with songs. There were two or three people for me. Terry was one, Butch was one, Al Straley was one that were just, sort of in my age group. Butch is a couple months younger than me, but both Al and Terry were, several years older. But there were these immensely talented, great musicians, like full-blown great songwriters. And of course, they were unknown at the time. But anyway, there was actually a specific incident where I was inspired to become a songwriter.
Yeah, that's amazing. Terry, I've been able to talk with him a couple of times about his records, and it's always one of those. It's weird because it's like you're talking with Terry Allen now and trying to understand Terry Allen, the 20-year-old, the 25-year-old, and the 35-year-old, and not view him as like this smart, wise, aged old man who you think of him as like kind of one of these heroes, and trying to figure out him as like the 20-year-old kid. It's he was already, even back then, back in high school, he was a guy that was very well liked and charismatic
kind of person. He was always kind of, and always real individualistic sort of person. But then, the range of his talents, didn't become known until later.
This episode of New Slang is brought to you by the Blue Light Live here in Lubbock, Texas. Blue Light has long been the heart and soul of the Lubbock singer-songwriter scene and has been a home away from home for some of Texas, Americana, country, and rock and roll's finest over the years. Talk with 99.9% of the songwriters who have come out of Lubbock and the Panhandle at large over the past 20 years, and they'll point to just how integral and necessary the Blue Light is. With live music and touring slowly but surely coming back, spots like the Blue Light are getting back to their usual ways as well. That means music every night of the week. Do you want to see that schedule? Well, I've got a few options for you. 1, go to their socials and give them a follow. That is at Blue Light Live on Twitter, at The Blue Light Live on Instagram, and of course by just searching The Blue Light Live on Facebook. They're consistently posting that week's lineup of shows, as well as those heavy hitters that ought to be on your calendar that are coming up on the horizon. 2, check out BlueLightLubbock.com as well. There they have the full schedule, the cover charges, time, any of those specials that may be happening. While there, go check out their merch page. They have a wide range of hats, koozies, hoodies, sweaters, beanies, jackets, and so much more. You can, of course, get all of your merch needs when you go see your favorite band take the stage at Blue Light. Just ask the bartender and they will get you all set. Speaking of which, that's another great way of seeing who's playing there. Just go to the Blue Light. It's at 1806 Buddy Holly Avenue here in Lubbock, Texas. And of course, again, that is BlueLightLubbock.com. I'll throw a link into the show notes too. Maybe I'll see you there. Okay, let's get back to the show. You mentioned Butch early on as far as becoming really prolific and as a songwriter. Obviously so many of his songs and so many of y'all's catalog in general points back to rural Lubbock living, this moment in time where, you're kind of basing a lot of songs off of the, I guess, like generations of families who have lived out here for y'all, family that either were farmers or, living out in Lubbock, rural living. And this moment in time that we've kind of been talking about as far as like getting where it's actually like feasible to go out into the world and go out to California or go out to wherever you feel the culture is, right? Do you feel like you were always like, I don't know, maybe like some of your first, I guess like your first themes, your first kind of subject matter was always going to be tied to what life was like growing up in Lubbock or in the South Plains in general?
Well, for myself, I don't think my writing has reflected that as much as my general taste has. Mm-hmm. Because for Butch, for one thing, is just a true master of that. Along with a lot of other stuff, but because most of my writing has been less specific than that, less geographically oriented, or some of it,
right?
But mostly mine is tended more to the sort of esoteric, or like I don't know, or maybe psychological, maybe that's, and that sense of it, we've talked about this a lot. Terry has talked about it a lot. Terry and Butch and Joe and I all have all through the years, we've kind of talked about what is it, what was happening with us that informed our music the way it did, and a lot of it just remains a mystery. But Butch and Terry both have talked on and on about how I think the way Terry put it was that the horizon was, the main feature. Mm-hmm. And so you just wanted to know what was past it. And so we had to leave. It's sort of, and but I don't know. The whole subject of what produces music is such a mysterious and unending, interesting question to me. And I love it. I love to theorize about it, but I don't know anybody yet that's come up with any real answers for any of it.
Right. I mean, it has to probably be one of those things where there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer.
Yeah.
And even like for an individual, it may be something for one song and it may be something totally different.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's right. Whatever, like, kind of trips the switch to make you feel like you want to express something, it's luck again. In a sense, serendipity is always a big feature of all creativity.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite aspects of your catalog, Joe's and Butch's, the Flatlanders in general, one of these things that I've always really loved and appreciated as far as going and trying to figure out what's going on, is how there's a shared catalog in a sense where you guys are recording each other's songs and you're re-recording songs at different points in y'all's life. For you, like, what do you like to see, like that journey of that song, as far as like, something that was cut on like the first Flatlanders record and seeing it then pass into what Joe does it on a solo record, and then what you bring back to it, and what have you guys had conversations about that, and like what maybe like brings you back to a song?
Well, it's really fun to watch a song metamorphosize, over a period of time. But and we talk about these kinds of things all the time, but we also never really, once again, for many years, once a year I have taught a songwriting class at this place called the Omega Institute in upstate New York, and a week-long class, and it I don't really teach it. I sort of organize a situation where people do a bunch of writing together and then discuss how the process. And so people learn about each other's process and each other, so I always say that I organize it so that the class teaches the class. But what happened to me through the, especially the first several years, I've done it for like 25 years. And the first several years was like, wow, me learning all these different attitudes that people have, finding out all these different perspectives that people had, and also me having to learn how to articulate things that were the way I thought already, except that I never had put it down on paper or expressed it. So I kind of have a catalog of a bunch of these thoughts and ideas about that whole subject, and like I said, it still remains. There remains an element of mystery in it, of like, why in the world does a melody? Why do certain melodies grab everybody? Why does a melody even do anything to you at all? That's weird, but it's still a fact. And thank goodness.
Yeah.
Music really, really, really has a power and the love of it is something that brings a lot of people together. Shared love of music is one of the greatest things that bonds communities together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a mystery.
Yeah, I think it's if we go back in history, it's the what connects us to like the fire, the story, the telling of stories, and trying to tell our story, right? In a lot of ways, or like trying to figure out what that story is, what connects us all together. And, it's one of those, the chicken or the egg thing, right? As far as, is it us telling the stories and we discovering why music is like that connective tissue, or is it the other way around where, it's just the vehicle? But it's a very, very fascinating thing. One of the things that I was wanting to ask you about was the last record you did with Dave Alvin, Downey to Lubbock. When I first heard that song, I really loved the song specifically because it felt like you guys really tapped into this whole thing of where, of course, he's talking about Lubbock and then you're talking about going out to California, and basically kind of in a lot of ways having like similar upbringings, but also thinking that maybe the other place is where all the cool stuff's happening. What was writing that song like? Can you take me back to I guess like the origins of that song and that project in general?
Well, it was that Dave started the song. He came up with that idea. That I'm a Downey to Lubbock bound. and he and then we were in the studio recording it, and this is really kind of strange, but this is way not usual for me. I don't usually work in this way, and it wasn't planned. But in my mind, we were and I think this was the intention. Was like, we're just going to put down some dummy tracks to get it going, so that we have something to work on. We'll have the form and all that. And he had a couple of verses, and then he laid out it's going to be him and then me and a chorus together, and him and me and a chorus together, and then so I just totally ad-libbed it. He had his verses recorded, and I was in there in the booth, and I just totally off the top of my head made up those verses. and I thought, okay, these are throwaway. I'll go back to the hotel. We were out in LA, so we did all the recording out there, and I'll write some. I'll sit down and really write some stuff for this. And when we got through with it, I said something like that to Dave and said, "No," he said, "we already got it. You got it." So we used the scratch, So and that was an unusual thing for me. It didn't even occur to me to think of it as that this was what we were going to put on the actual record. But I liked it. Once I got over the shock of him saying we were going to keep what we just did.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed that song. It's one of those things where, like, that song is so infectious. The rhythm of you kind of feel like that rhythm of the road of the chugging along, and then it's like it taps into that whole thing of like wanting to get out of your hometown, and then like kind of figuring like, this place, these other places that we're going to aren't dissimilar from our own experiences, even though they're, a little different. The Mexican food's a little different. That's I
think it's one of the one of the beauties of that collaboration between me and Dave was the fact that we did come from, in certain ways, real dissimilar backgrounds, but in other ways, it was like all musicians. It was a shared trajectory, I guess, with at least musicians that, like, we're not conservatory musicians that learned in school and learned how to compose and all that stuff. We're basically folk musicians,
right?
And Dave, although had an electric guitar, I was playing acoustic and harmonica. So in a sense, it's really untrained musicians expressing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which was kind of my definition of folk music.
Right. Which, going back to this new record, it feels like there's a lot of maybe shared experience in that way, where it's not necessarily like, you guys making up lyrics on the spot, but it feels like this new record is very, very organic in that same sense of like that it wasn't necessarily like, oh, we got to get a new record out right now.
Absolutely. In fact, it was recorded. It was actually brought about by using off time when we were doing other records, but everything happened to be set up, and let's do some of these old things that we used to do years ago, and we had done those songs, some of them thousands of times, but had never recorded them, and it was like, so there was very much, except for the brand new songs, the couple that Butch wrote and the one that Joe wrote. I didn't have any new ones on it, but the rest of them were things that we just had done a lot many years ago, and still liked them, still liked the songs, still were songs that we still might do now and then in a live show. So they had been through a certain kind of winnowing process that wasn't a matter of, let's go back through and pick out which songs we should pull out and do. It didn't happen that way. It was like, hey, y'all, you remember that old Leon Russell song we used to do? And we had Joe actually, had all the recordings and everything, and he went through and kind of sifted through, because there's a bunch more of them than these that were sort of in that same form. Mm-hmm. And we probably wouldn't ever want to play them publicly because Lloyd hasn't been brought in yet to fix them,
I want to break one more time to talk about our pals over at Desert Door and offer up a quick Thomas Mooney's cocktail minute. As I've said probably 100 times by now, by no means am I a seasoned mixologist or bartender, but these have been some of my Desert Door go-tos. For starters, let's just go with the tried and true ranch water. Pop the top off the Topo Chico, take a good swig, now pour in some Desert Door, and top it off by throwing in a few lime wedges. Never fails. This one, it's so simple it probably doesn't even count, but again, pretty foolproof. Do the exact same thing, but get you a Mexican Coca-Cola. I guess you can go with a regular one, but you're really cutting yourself short if you don't opt for the Mexican import variety. All right, here's the change-up you've been waiting for. Desert Door Sangria. This one is prime for when you have company coming over and you aren't wanting to just be over there making 6 different drinks at a time. What you'll need is some Desert Door, obviously, a bottle of red wine, honey, boiling water, apple cider vinegar, some cinnamon sticks, a couple of apples, and some thyme sprigs. I know, that may sound intimidating, but trust me, it's worth the prep, and honestly, it's pretty easy. For starters, get you a punch bowl, add that honey, those cinnamon sticks, and the boiling water together. Now you're going to want to stir that all up and let it cool down for about an hour or so. Remember, patience is a virtue. Once that's done, add some Desert Door and stir vigorously. Now add the wine, the cider, and the vinegar, and continue stirring until it's equally mixed. Now slice those apples up and toss them in. Put in those thyme sprigs as well. Now you can pour that over some ice and you have a mighty fine sangria. Chef's kiss. Anyway, those have been some of my favorite go-tos as of late. And remember, Desert Door is as versatile as vodka and more refined, smooth, complex, and intriguing than tequila. It's rich and balanced, and whether you decide to keep it simple or want to experiment, Desert Door is that perfect Texas spirit. There's plenty more recipes over at desertdoor.com as well. Check out the show notes for a link. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Obviously, Lloyd, as far as a staple of Lubbock music, of Texas singer-songwriters. Obviously, he's not a singer-songwriter, but he's helped form and mold a lot of the records and the music that we've loved the past, 40, 50 years. What's it been? What is it like working with him in a role where, he comes in and is playing pedal steel and producing and being that voice in the studio setting?
Well, that's interesting. That's another really organic process that happened. Lloyd and I knew the older Maines brothers, his uncles, dad and uncles, and he but Lloyd and a couple of the younger ones, we had some mutual friends that were DJs in around Lubbock, and Lloyd was a fan of the Flatlanders way before we ever did any recording or anything. He was one of the few people around Lubbock that ever heard us play. He heard us over at the house, and he heard us and long before he did any playing with us or anything. Mm-hmm. And that was prior to the Ely band period, which was when Lloyd and Joe and Jesse Taylor, of course. When the Ely band happened for all those years and just was one of the best bands ever to come out of anywhere, not just Lubbock, but anywhere. Lloyd produced. I'm pretty sure he produced that. It's kind of a tangled history. It's kind of funny. I was friends with Terry and with Butch and with Joe, all separately, before they knew each other. It was very weird. And I didn't introduce them to each other, but I brought Joe and Butch together. I kind of deliberately engineered that to happen, because I kept telling Joe, I've got this friend that has written the best songs. And when we finally got together, we were sitting there one night and Butch was playing some songs, and at some point Joe looked over at me and went, "Oh, I see what you mean." But I had already been friends with Lloyd too. And then I was gone away. I'd gone to Denver and was gone, for most of the 70s. Well, Lloyd came back to Lubbock and made those records at Caldwell Studios, and where Lloyd was the producer. And so Terry and Joe became friends through that process. And I already had been friends with Terry before, but not in that context. So then when Lloyd played with Joe all that time, and then just of course just more and more and more became recognized as a musical giant. Lloyd also. I think that my second high tone album was, which Lloyd produced in Nashville. I think that might have been the first record that Lloyd produced. It was on other than just a local label, other than the Caldwell Studios and what was it? What was his label? I can't remember that Smoking the Dummy and Lubbock on Everything, and
right.
I can't remember the label that it originally was on. That's odd. I have to go look it up now. But anyway, and then Lloyd. But so once again, it was another like organic process. Lloyd was just such a close friend, and and had been a fan. But before we knew what a good musician he was, so it sort of happened accidentally in a way. That it's another one of those lucky luck things,
right? Yeah, I've often heard people talk about when it comes to Lloyd, as far as his producing style goes, is I think maybe we think of like producers or these iconic producers having very distinct sounds, as far as like T-Bone Burnett or like Rick Rubin or any of these people having very distinct sounds and feel to the records they produce. But Lloyd, I've often heard people kind of talk about how much of a listener he is and how adaptive he is, as far as there's not, you can feel what's maybe a Lloyd Maines record is, but it's not distinct because of him specifically.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like, it's just like, he's very adaptive as far as who he's working with.
In a sense, I think that's got a little bit to do with him being such a good musician and sideman. He's a guy that knows how to fit in with a band, and yet at the same time he is authoritative. He really does. He's just got the ears and plus just such a pleasant personality to work with, that he has all the ingredients that that he deserved that wonderful reputation that he has acquired. Right.
Yeah. Now, another thing that I find interesting as far as your career goes when it comes to releasing music, and I'm sure people have touched on this as far as the new record, even as far as this new record is about, I don't know, Hills and Valleys was 2009. So, about 12 years ago, but like you've had these moments in your career where you've had, a 10-year pause. And of course, just the Flatlanders in general, having this giant pause of notoriety to being obviously the 1990 record, more legend than a band. Do you think that's always kind of helped y'all as far as, staying where like these relationships are still strong, because there's been room for y'all to have your own solo stuff, and there's been room for y'all to do individual things. I guess that's where I'm going with this question. Yeah. Do you think that's been kind of a necessary, that having that room to grow in your all's own directions at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's been another great, good luck with that we had. It was strange because we came together so organically and really out of friendship and mutual fans of each other. The Flatlanders didn't come together as like a commercial enterprise. It was totally for the love of the music. That was the whole thing that made it happen. And and the whole circle of friends that we were involved with. You know, it was like it was a creative bunch of people, the artists and writers and musicians and everything, dancers. You know, they're part of our gang that kind of ended up sort of centering around the Flatlanders. That was the music was always kind of the center of it, but it didn't get created as a band that was going to go take the world by storm. And you know, that first record was never really published until 10 years later, and that was in Europe. Mm-hmm. And then it was 10 years after that when More a Legend, when it was published in the U.S. So it was 20 years old when it was first released in the U.S. So in that 20 years, you know, we had done a lot of individual stuff, you know, and it was like we never did plan out any of that stuff. Okay, now let's get back together. And it was like it's just because circumstances arose that let it be possible, and we took advantage of it when it came up. It was all like an experiment, you know.
Right. Yeah. It's going back to like that 70s version of the Flatlanders, that 71, 72 era. You know, I've heard that you guys had where, you know, there could be a lot of people who could claim that they were a Flatlander at one point or another, or they had played with the Flatlanders during this era. And I think in a lot of ways, you guys are like a bridge point between a lot of different eras in music, and specifically with someone like Tommy X Hancock, as far as his importance to Lubbock music before the Flatlanders, and then what stems out of there, especially with what he did later with you know, Supernatural Family Band. And can you expand on like Tommy as far as like an individual who I think maybe not a lot of Lubbock people necessarily now know who that is, but obviously played such a pivotal role in what Lubbock music was.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting story. And it was, oddly enough, Tommy had always, he was a local star, you know, and in fact, Charlene was a television star, you know, local Lubbock television when she was a teenager, and Tommy was always you know, he always would, whatever the most popular country and western nightclub in town was, it would be, Tommy owned it and usually had the house band that played there, you know, but he was the springboard for all kinds of people, Buddy Holly and Waylon Jennings. And he was the guy that gave them a platform. And then he and I became very close friends. It was fun. A mutual friend of ours, he had gone to law school, and our old friend John McDivitt, he hasn't been in Lubbock a long time, but he was my best friend in grade school. He was in law school with Tommy, and they got to be friends. And so John, for several years, kept telling me, "You need to meet Tommy Hancock." I knew Tommy Hancock, you know, by reputation. He said, "But you got to meet him. He's just great. He's a wonderful, smart guy, you know." And he finally got us together, and Tommy and I became real close friends originally because of our shared interest in like metaphysics and spirituality and all that. That was kind of the main basis. But then also when Tommy found out that I was, you know, he thought I was like a rock and roller that had been living in Austin, you know. When he found out that I was actually a country musician, his mind was blown. It was, and then that became it was actually a lot of the early days of the Flatlanders started out at Tommy and Charlene's house, and the kids, the Supernatural Family Band, they were all little. They were kids then, But Tommy was, and he ended up actually playing on the record. He didn't play much with us in any of the live performances anywhere. He didn't travel with us anywhere, like down to Austin and all that. But he did play on the record, and in the original incarnations before he ever recorded anything, he was right there in it. He was part of the band. And there's quite a few other people that we sort of thought of as members of the Flatlanders.
Yeah.
But Tommy was a major part of that. And it was really because he and I had both the music and our other interests in common. We became really close, and that's a big part of the story of how the Flatlanders happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's one of those little things that maybe we don't necessarily think about, but you mentioned him being an owner of a club. The most popular club in town always, right? Or like Terry's dad bringing in different music acts.
Lloyd Allen.
Having that's so integral to the foundation of a lot of people when as far as their memories going back to Lubbock and becoming songwriters and or artists or musicians and it's also maybe an interesting thing where geographically, since Lubbock is in the middle of nowhere, it's between, major places, maybe like where these stars, of course, had to stop in Lubbock because of obviously, it's a good place to stop on the way between California and wherever they're going back east or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So how important do you remember going to a bunch of shows out like at the Cotton Club or any of these other places growing up?
Well, when I was small, I didn't, because those were they were rough places, and they were it wasn't a family type atmosphere at all. They were like raunchy nightclubs, but then later on, I played the Cotton Club a lot with Tommy, and but he had earlier clubs inside Lubbock, the Rendezvous Club, and I was too young at that time. The shows that I saw were like concerts, like Sled Allen's, like I saw Elvis and Johnny Cash, at the. I always thought it was the Fair Park Coliseum, but it might have been the Sled Allen Arena. That's what I think Terry thinks that's where. But anyway, someday I got to look all that up and get it really together. But I know that Sled Allen produced that stuff, and I was, and I think there's so much hidden history behind all of it. As you said, it was a stopover point for a whole bunch of people, and so Tommy was friends with everybody, with all of those people, because he'd have the club that they'd play at on the way through, and the little circle of friends that were several of them that were DJs in Lubbock. Waylon Jennings, Bill Mack was one of them. These were people that were influential on me before I ever knew they were musicians, because they were DJs. Because heard them on the radio all the time, and KLLL was one of the best radio stations in the world. It was the funniest. Its whole motif was crazy off the wall humor, and the Corbins, Slim and Sky, and all the it was part of our beautiful. I'm getting these messages. My granddaughter, has got a real serious problem with her eye that came up the last couple of days.
No.
But anyway, we're. I think I diverted myself from the question you asked. We were talking about Lubbock being a stopover point. So it really was. It was a crossroads, and so I saw some of those people as they came through. When I was younger, but mostly it was things had changed a bit. Willie Nelson came and saw the Flatlanders at the Old Town Pump, which was on 4th Street. I think it was at 4th and Q, something like that. And it was in the days before he moved to Austin, when he still had short hair.
Right.
And he was there. He was there because he was part of that circle of friends. Willie was a star in Lubbock before he was nationally. Of course, his songwriting, he was a star as a writer, but as a performer, he was played on the radio in Lubbock as if he was a, very major star, but before Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain and all that.
Right. That's what's so amazing about someone like Willie Nelson is I think sometimes maybe like young up and coming artists today, they think that if they don't have success by, 25 or some ridiculously young number, then they're not successful. And then you kind of have to tell them, hey, like but you have to tell them, that like Willie Nelson didn't have his like first number one until he was like 42 years old so like you got to just give it some time. It goes back to that whole thing of we're talking about at the very beginning, as far as the hard work and the talent and the luck. Allow some luck to come in. So one thing I'll get you out on is I think we always talk about Joe Ely having like, a lot of the street cred with the Clash, right? And all of that that's one of those things that everyone loves that relationship. And it's very, very awesome. Something that maybe not enough people know about though, is that you and Mudhoney had put out an EP together.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating right there as well. How did that come together? Like, how did you end up, doing this couple of singles with them?
There was somebody I was on Elektra at the time, and there was somebody at Elektra that was a common friend who came up with the idea, and he just he knew them, and he said, I think you guys would like each other. I think which was true, and then it was and we were all of enough of the experimental nature to try it out, and it turned out to be just a wonderful. It was an experiment that, at least it worked, and it ended up bringing me to a circle of people that would never ever have heard of me otherwise.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those when you look at the Jimmie Dale Gilmore catalog, you see that and you go, oh, I wonder, I have to go find this. And then you find it, and then it just makes sense, and I think it's just one of those things where, again, like we talk about Joe and the Clash, we need to talk about Jimmie Dale Gilmore and Mudhoney a little bit more too. So. But it's been really, really.
Well, I guess
go ahead.
The Clash was a bit more of a household name around the world, but Mudhoney really had a real following, a real loyal following, and so that was a good thing to happen at that period in my career.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, it's I go back every once in a while and listen to those songs right there that y'all did. And yeah, it's been so great talking with you this afternoon. I really do enjoy this new record. I've been listening to it, driving around Lubbock, and I think it's, obviously people are going to love it, and hopefully more people go out and discover who the Flatlanders were.
Well, I hope so. That would be really fun. It's fun to watch it unfold. Mm-hmm. And I really like the fact that you know a bunch of the history. That's encouraging to me.
Well, yeah.
People to know some of the background there.
Yeah, it's been it's one of those things where I moved up here. I grew up in Fort Stockton, and I moved up here to go to school, and always been fascinated with music, and was going to school for journalism, and just the two worlds collided, and know a lot of like the local guys, the scene right now, and what's been coming out. And then of course, when you do that, you go back and start discovering more of the people before there, and trying to find where certain points are on the in the Lubbock history map and all that kind of stuff. And this is where this bar was, and this is where this was at, and that kind of stuff. So it's been I enjoy all the the looking of the Lubbock music history.
All right, that is it for this episode. Be sure to check out our presenting partners over at Desert Door and the Blue Light Live here in Lubbock, Texas. As mentioned up top, this is one of a 3-part series with the Flatlanders. This episode was obviously with Jimmie Dale Gilmore. Later this week, I'm joined by Joe Ely and Butch Hancock of the Flatlanders. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't just yet. And yeah, thanks so much for listening.